For a decade, everyone at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital knew Elena Rodriguez as the quiet night shift nurse who never caused trouble. She arrived precisely at 7 each evening, worked her 12-hour shift without complaint, and disappeared before the morning staff arrived. When armed terrorists stormed the hospital's cardiac wing last Tuesday, no one expected the soft-spoken woman in scrubs to become the only thing standing between innocent lives and certain death. What they discovered about Elena's past would change everything they thought they knew about the unassuming woman who had walked among them for 10 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital cast their familiar harsh glow across the linoleum floors as Elena Rodriguez made her way through the cardiac intensive care unit. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound against the polished surface, a habit ingrained from years of moving through these corridors like a ghost. At 42, she possessed an unremarkable appearance that seemed designed to blend into hospital backgrounds: medium height, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and scrubs that hung loose enough to disguise any hint of the lean muscle beneath. Dr. Harrison Mitchell had made it his personal mission to ensure Elena knew exactly where she stood in the hospital hierarchy. As the newly appointed chief of cardiac surgery, he ruled the ICU with the kind of arrogance that came from a prestigious medical degree and family connections that reached into the hospital's board of directors. His father had been chief of staff for 15 years before retirement, and Harrison carried that legacy like a weapon against anyone he deemed beneath his station. Elena represented everything that irritated him about the nursing staff. She never laughed at his jokes during morning briefings. She didn't defer to his medical opinions with the appropriate reverence he expected from support personnel. Most infuriating of all, she had an unsettling habit of quietly correcting medication dosages or suggesting alternative treatment approaches that invariably proved more effective than his initial orders. The morning sun filtered through the ICU windows as Harrison entered for his daily rounds, his white coat pristine, and his stethoscope draped around his neck like a badge of authority. The nursing staff straightened unconsciously at his presence, all except Elena, who continued monitoring her patient's vital signs with focused concentration. "Nurse Rodriguez," Harrison announced, his voice carrying across the unit with deliberate volume. "I trust you've managed to follow the medication protocols without any creative interpretations today." Elena looked up from her patient chart, her expression neutral. Mrs. Chen in bed 7 showed signs of fluid retention overnight. "I reduced her IV rate and increased her Lasix dosage according to standing orders. Her output has improved significantly." Harrison's jaw tightened. Standing orders were supposed to require his approval, but Elena had an irritating knowledge of hospital protocols that seemed to circumvent his authority at every turn. "In the future, Nurse Rodriguez, perhaps you could consult with the attending physician before making such decisions. We wouldn't want to confuse medical treatment with nursing intuition." The other nurses exchanged glances familiar with this daily ritual of humiliation. Elena simply nodded and returned to her charting, but Harrison noticed something that made his skin crawl with suspicion. Her handwriting was too precise, too controlled. Most nurses scribbled quick notes between patients, but Elena's documentation read like military field reports, concise, detailed, and written with the kind of systematic precision that spoke of training far beyond nursing school. "Where did you complete your nursing education, Rodriguez?" Harrison asked, moving closer to her station. "University of Colorado," Elena replied without looking up from her charts. Harrison pulled out his phone and made a show of researching her background. "Interesting. Their program doesn't typically emphasize the kind of advanced cardiac protocols you seem familiar with. Did you complete additional certification somewhere?" Elena's pen paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing. "I've always been a quick learner." The tension between them had been building for months, ever since Harrison's arrival at St. Catherine's. Elena's previous supervisors had appreciated her competence and reliability, but Harrison saw her quiet confidence as a challenge to his authority. He began implementing new policies designed specifically to limit her autonomy: additional paperwork requirements, mandatory approval for routine procedures, and public critiques of her patient care decisions during shift changes. Elena absorbed each attack with the same calm professionalism she brought to everything else. She completed the extra documentation without complaint, sought approval for procedures she had been handling independently for years, and endured Harrison's criticisms in front of her colleagues with no visible reaction. But the other nurses began to notice small details that didn't quite fit the image of a submissive employee being bullied by her supervisor. During a particularly difficult intubation procedure, Elena had stepped forward with movements that seemed choreographed for efficiency. Her hands positioned the equipment with surgical precision while she provided respiratory support that kept the patient stable through a procedure that should have required an anesthesiologist. When Harrison questioned her technique afterward, she simply stated she had learned from observing doctors over the years. The night shift nurses noticed Elena's unusual knowledge of pharmaceutical interactions, particularly with medications typically used in trauma surgery, rather than cardiac care. She could calculate dosages for exotic pain medications and antibiotics that most ICU nurses had never encountered. When asked about her expertise, she credited medical journals and continuing education courses, but her knowledge seemed far too practical for academic study. Security guards commented on Elena's uncanny awareness of hospital layout and protocols. She knew the locations of emergency supplies that had been moved months earlier, could navigate service corridors that most staff members didn't know existed, and demonstrated an intimate familiarity with the hospital's security systems that seemed unusual for someone who worked exclusively in the cardiac unit. During staff meetings, Elena's suggestions for improving patient care protocols revealed a strategic mindset that impressed even senior physicians. She proposed workflow modifications that increased efficiency while reducing the risk of medical errors, recommended equipment purchases that proved invaluable months later, and identified potential security vulnerabilities in patient transport procedures that administration hadn't considered. Harrison's suspicions deepened when he observed Elena during medical emergencies. While other nurses showed appropriate stress responses to crisis situations, Elena became impossibly calm and focused. Her vital signs monitoring during cardiac arrests was flawless. Her medication preparation was faster and more accurate than nurses with decades of experience, and her ability to anticipate physician needs during procedures bordered on precognitive. The breaking point came during a particularly busy evening shift when multiple patients required simultaneous attention. Elena moved between rooms with fluid efficiency, managing complex medication regimens, coordinating with respiratory therapy, and providing family support without missing a single detail. Harrison watched from the nurse's station as she essentially ran the entire ICU single-handedly while other staff members struggled to keep pace. "Nurse Rodriguez," Harrison called out as Elena finished updating patient charts at the end of her shift. "A word in my office." Elena followed him into the small administrative office adjacent to the ICU, her expression giving nothing away. Harrison closed the door and turned to face her, his frustration finally boiling over into open hostility. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm tired of pretending you're just another nurse," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "No one learns that level of medical knowledge from textbooks. No one develops that kind of crisis management ability from bedside experience. I want to know who you really are, and what you're doing in my ICU." Elena met his gaze steadily, her dark eyes revealing nothing. "I'm a registered nurse with 10 years of experience at this hospital. My qualifications are on file with Human Resources, and my performance evaluations speak for themselves." Harrison slammed his hand on the desk. "Don't give me bureaucratic answers. I've seen combat medics with less expertise than you demonstrate every shift. I've watched you handle procedures that require years of specialized training. Either you're the most naturally gifted nurse in medical history, or you're hiding something that could compromise patient safety." For a long moment, Elena said nothing. The silence stretched between them while Harrison waited for some crack in her composure, some admission that would validate his suspicions. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that made him take an involuntary step backward. "Dr. Mitchell, I understand your concerns about patient safety. If you have specific issues with my nursing care, I'm happy to address them through appropriate channels. If you have questions about my qualifications, Human Resources maintains all personnel files. Beyond that, I'm not sure what kind of response you're expecting." The conversation ended in stalemate, but Harrison's campaign against Elena intensified over the following weeks. He began documenting every interaction, searching for any deviation from standard protocols that he could use to justify formal disciplinary action. He restricted her patient assignments to routine monitoring cases, hoping to limit her opportunity to demonstrate the troubling competence that made him so uncomfortable. Elena adapted to each new restriction without protest, but the other nurses began to notice the systematic harassment. Veteran staff members who had worked with Elena for years started speaking up about Harrison's treatment of their colleague. They pointed out that Elena's patient outcomes were consistently better than average, her documentation was impeccable, and her willingness to work difficult shifts without complaint made her invaluable to the unit. The hospital grapevine carried stories about Elena's quiet acts of kindness that went far beyond her nursing duties. She had helped family members navigate insurance problems, translated for Spanish-speaking patients when official interpreters weren't available, and stayed late countless times to comfort dying patients who had no visitors. Her personal phone number was known to dozens of former patients who called her for medical advice years after their discharge. Elena's apartment reflected the same careful anonymity she maintained at work. The one-bedroom unit in a modest complex across town contained basic furniture, a few books, and virtually no personal photographs or mementos. Her kitchen was equipped for someone who ate simple meals alone, and her closet held multiple sets of identical scrubs alongside a small collection of civilian clothes that could have belonged to any middle-aged woman. The only hint of anything unusual was a locked filing cabinet in her bedroom that contained documents she never showed to anyone. Medical textbooks that covered trauma surgery, emergency medicine, and battlefield casualty care filled a bookshelf that visitors never saw. A locked gun safe in her closet held items that would have surprised her hospital colleagues, and a go-bag packed with cash, identification documents, and emergency supplies sat ready in her bedroom closet. Elena's daily routine was methodical and unchanging. She arrived at work precisely on time, completed her shift with quiet efficiency, and disappeared immediately afterward. She shopped for groceries at off-peak hours, exercised at a 24-hour gym when it was nearly empty, and maintained minimal social contact with anyone who might ask too many questions about her background. The few nurses who had attempted to befriend Elena over the years found her pleasant but elusive. She deflected personal questions with polite redirection, declined invitations to social gatherings, and maintained professional boundaries that discouraged casual intimacy. Her colleagues respected her privacy while wondering what kind of life she led outside the hospital walls. Elena's medical knowledge extended far beyond what any ICU nurse should reasonably possess. She understood complex pharmaceutical interactions, could interpret diagnostic imaging with radiologist-level accuracy, and demonstrated surgical skills that impressed even experienced physicians. When questioned about her expertise, she consistently credited continuing education and professional development, but her explanations never quite accounted for the depth of her practical knowledge. During medical emergencies, Elena's behavioral patterns shifted in ways that suggested training far beyond civilian healthcare. She assessed situations with tactical awareness, prioritized multiple casualties with triage efficiency, and maintained operational security consciousness that seemed inappropriate for a hospital environment. Her colleagues attributed these quirks to personality traits rather than professional background, but observant staff members noticed the discrepancies. Harrison's investigation into Elena's background yielded frustratingly little information. Her nursing license was legitimate, her employment history showed steady progression through various healthcare facilities, and her references spoke highly of her clinical competence and professional reliability. Yet something about the carefully constructed paper trail felt artificial, as if someone had deliberately created a plausible backstory that would withstand casual scrutiny. The University of Colorado nursing program confirmed Elena's graduation but couldn't provide detailed academic records due to a computer system upgrade that had corrupted older files. Her previous employers offered glowing recommendations but seemed oddly vague about specific details of her service. Credit reports showed a responsible financial history with no unusual patterns, and background checks revealed no criminal activity or concerning associations. Elena's social media presence was virtually non-existent, which Harrison found suspicious in an age when most people documented their lives online. Her phone records showed minimal personal communication, and her financial transactions revealed a lifestyle of careful frugality that left few traces. Even her medical records were frustratingly routine, showing only standard preventive care and minor treatments that revealed nothing about her physical capabilities or medical history. The investigation reached a dead end when Harrison discovered that certain aspects of Elena's background were protected by privacy laws that prevented deeper inquiry. Her military service records, if they existed, were classified beyond his clearance level. Educational transcripts from certain time periods were sealed under federal privacy regulations. Even her current address had been obtained through channels that suggested official protection rather than standard civilian housing. Elena seemed aware of Harrison's investigation but showed no concern about his findings. She continued her work with the same methodical competence that had first aroused his suspicions, neither acknowledging his efforts nor attempting to conceal whatever secrets she might be hiding. Her behavior suggested someone accustomed to scrutiny who understood that the best defense against investigation was to maintain an absolutely consistent facade. The stalemate between Elena and Harrison created tension throughout the cardiac ICU that affected patient care and staff morale. Other nurses found themselves caught between loyalty to a respected colleague and deference to their department head. Physicians who had worked with Elena for years noticed the hostile atmosphere but felt powerless to intervene in what appeared to be a personality conflict between supervisor and subordinate. Elena's patient advocacy became more pronounced during this period, as if she was deliberately demonstrating her commitment to healthcare excellence in response to Harrison's attacks on her character. She spent extra time with difficult patients, advocated more aggressively for pain management and comfort measures, and showed particular attention to veterans and trauma survivors who seemed to trust her in ways that puzzled other staff members. The quiet war between Elena and Harrison might have continued indefinitely, each side probing for weaknesses while maintaining professional facades. But external forces beyond their control were about to transform their personal conflict into something far more dangerous. Elena's carefully constructed civilian identity was about to be tested in ways that would reveal whether her decade of peaceful service had dulled the skills that had once made her invaluable in very different circumstances. As autumn settled over the city, Elena continued her nightly routine with the same methodical precision that had characterized her 10 years at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital. She had no way of knowing that events were already in motion that would strip away her carefully maintained anonymity and force her to confront the part of herself she had buried beneath a decade of bedside nursing. The storm that was coming would test not only her medical skills but also the darker expertise she had spent years trying to forget. The cardiac ICU hummed with its familiar sounds of ventilators, monitoring equipment, and quiet conversations between night shift staff.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Elena moved through her assigned patients with practiced efficiency, checking medication levels, adjusting IV drips, and providing the kind of attentive care that had earned her the respect of everyone except Harrison Mitchell. She had no way of knowing that across the city, men with automatic weapons were making final preparations for an assault that would transform the hospital from a place of healing into a battlefield. Elena's transformation from anonymous nurse to something far more dangerous was less than 48 hours away, but for now she remained exactly what she appeared to be, a dedicated healthcare professional whose greatest concern was ensuring her patients survived the night. The secrets she carried would soon become the only thing standing between innocent lives and violent death. But tonight, she was simply Elena Rodriguez, night shift nurse, guardian of the sick and wounded, protector of those who could not protect themselves. Harrison Mitchell had no idea that his campaign of harassment against Elena was about to become irrelevant in the face of a crisis that would reveal exactly why some nurses possessed skills that went far beyond bedside manner. The hospital's carefully maintained routine was about to be shattered by violence that would strip away all pretense and reveal the true nature of the woman who had walked among them for 10 years without anyone understanding what she really was. The breaking point arrived on a humid Wednesday morning when Elena discovered Harrison rifling through her personal locker in the staff changing room. She had arrived early for her shift, and found him examining her belongings with the kind of methodical search that suggested professional training rather than casual snooping. "Looking for something specific, Dr. Mitchell?" Elena asked from the doorway, her voice carrying a dangerous quiet that made Harrison's hands freeze over her spare scrubs. He straightened slowly, his face flushing with embarrassment and defiance. Hospital security requires periodic inspections of staff areas. I'm simply ensuring compliance with our safety protocols. Elena stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. The click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the small space filled with metal lockers and the scent of industrial disinfectant. Hospital security doesn't typically involve department heads conducting unauthorized searches of employee personal property. That would require administrative approval and union notification. Harrison's jaw tightened as he realized she knew exactly which regulations he was violating. Perhaps you'd prefer to explain why a cardiac nurse carries medical supplies that aren't part of our standard inventory. Elena's gaze shifted to her open locker, where Harrison had obviously discovered the small emergency medical kit she kept alongside her personal items. The kit contained medications and equipment that went far beyond what any ICU nurse would reasonably need for routine patient care. Advanced trauma supplies, military-grade antibiotics, and surgical instruments that belonged in an operating room rather than a staff locker. I believe in being prepared for emergencies, Elena said, moving to close her locker with deliberate calm. Patient safety sometimes requires resources that aren't immediately available through normal channels. Harrison grabbed her wrist as she reached for the locker door, his grip tight enough to leave marks. No nurse needs morphine auto-injectors and combat gauze for patient safety. No civilian has any legitimate reason to carry military medical supplies. I want answers and I want them now. Elena looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up to meet his eyes. Something in her expression made Harrison release his grip and take an involuntary step backward. The woman standing before him no longer resembled the submissive nurse he had been harassing for months. Her posture had shifted into something predatory, and her dark eyes held a coldness that suggested violence was a familiar companion. Mitchell, Elena said, her voice carrying an authority that filled the small room. I'm going to give you one opportunity to walk away from this conversation and never mention what you've seen here. That would be the wise choice. Harrison's medical degree and family connections had never prepared him for the kind of fear that now crawled up his spine. Elena Rodriguez, quiet night shift nurse, had transformed into something that made his primitive hindbrain scream warnings about predators and prey. But his arrogance overrode his survival instincts, and he pressed forward into dangerous territory. Are you threatening me? Because that would be grounds for immediate termination and criminal charges. I have every right to ensure the safety of this hospital, and you have no authority to prevent legitimate security measures. Elena studied him for a long moment, as if calculating variables in an equation that would determine his immediate future. You're absolutely right, Dr. Mitchell. You have every right to follow hospital security protocols. I suggest you do exactly that through proper channels, with appropriate documentation and administrative oversight. She closed her locker and walked past him toward the door, her movements smooth and controlled. Harrison grabbed her arm again, this time with both hands attempting to prevent her from leaving. The response was immediate and professionally devastating. Elena's defensive reaction lasted less than 3 seconds. She pivoted into Harrison's grip, used his own momentum to unbalance him, and applied leverage that sent him stumbling backward into the bank of lockers. The movement was so smooth and efficient that Harrison barely understood what had happened until he found himself pressed against cold metal with Elena's forearm across his throat and her other hand controlling his wrist in a grip that made his fingers go numb. Physical restraint of a colleague without justification constitutes assault under hospital policy and state law, Elena said, her voice conversational despite the fact that she had just demonstrated combat skills that no nursing program taught. I would hate for your medical career to be derailed by poor decision-making. She released him and stepped back, leaving Harrison gasping and shaking against the lockers. The entire encounter had been so quick and professional that he almost wondered if it had really happened. Elena straightened her scrubs and checked her appearance in the small mirror mounted on the wall, as if subduing a department head was simply another routine task to be completed before starting her shift. I believe you have rounds to complete, Dr. Mitchell. I'll be starting my patient assessments now. Please let me know if you have any medical concerns that require nursing attention. Elena left Harrison alone in the changing room, But their confrontation marked the beginning of a campaign that would escalate far beyond personal harassment. Harrison understood that he had encountered something dangerous masquerading as a healthcare worker, and his determination to expose Elena's secrets became an obsession that consumed his professional judgment. Over the following weeks, Harrison implemented increasingly aggressive measures designed to force Elena into situations where her unusual skills would become obvious to others. He scheduled her for the most challenging patient assignments, hoping she would demonstrate competence that exceeded normal nursing capabilities. He required her to assist with procedures that typically didn't involve ICU nurses, expecting her to reveal knowledge that would raise questions about her background. Elena adapted to each escalation with the same calm professionalism she brought to everything else, but her responses revealed layers of expertise that made Harrison's suspicions seem increasingly justified. When assigned to trauma cases, she displayed triage skills that belonged in emergency medicine rather than cardiac care. Her knowledge of pharmaceutical protocols extended to medications used in military medicine and combat casualty care. During a particularly complex cardiac catheterization procedure, Elena anticipated equipment needs and medication requirements with uncanny accuracy. She prepared IV lines, adjusted monitoring equipment, and provided patient support that allowed the cardiologist to complete the procedure in record time. Her movements were choreographed for maximum efficiency, and her understanding of the procedure rivaled that of physicians who had spent years mastering the technique. Nurse Rodriguez, the cardiologist, commented afterward, "Your assistance was exceptional. Have you considered pursuing additional certification in interventional cardiology?" Elena deflected the question with characteristic modesty, but Harrison noticed the way she had positioned herself during the procedure to maintain visual awareness of all room entrances and exits. Her attention to procedural details had been remarkable, but her security consciousness seemed inappropriate for a hospital environment. She had behaved like someone accustomed to working in conditions where situational awareness could mean the difference between life and death. Harrison's investigation into Elena's background intensified as he recruited allies among the hospital administration who shared his concerns about security and personnel reliability. He argued that Elena's unusual competence and mysterious background represented potential liability for the hospital, particularly given the sensitive nature of cardiac surgery and the valuable medical equipment in their department. Dr. Patricia Henley, the hospital's chief medical officer, initially dismissed Harrison's concerns as personality conflicts that should be resolved through human resources rather than administrative intervention. But Harrison's documentation of Elena's unusual behavior patterns and unexplained expertise eventually convinced her to authorize a more thorough background investigation. The investigation revealed frustrating gaps in Elena's documented history that raised more questions than they answered. Her nursing education was legitimate, but her clinical rotations had been completed at military medical facilities rather than civilian hospitals. Her employment history showed periods of unexplained absence that couldn't be accounted for by vacation time or medical leave. Credit reports revealed that Elena's income had been supplemented by payments from government agencies that used classification codes rather than descriptive names. Her medical insurance was provided through a federal program typically reserved for employees with security clearances. Even her apartment lease had been arranged through a housing assistance program that served personnel in sensitive government positions. Elena seemed aware of the investigation but showed no concern about the scrutiny. If anything, her patient care became even more exemplary during this period, as if she was deliberately demonstrating her value to the hospital while her supervisors questioned her loyalty. She volunteered for additional shifts, assisted with complex procedures outside her normal duties, and provided patient advocacy that impressed even physicians who had initially supported Harrison's concerns. The nursing staff began to notice the hostile atmosphere surrounding Elena and rallied to support their colleague against what they perceived as unfair persecution. Veteran nurses spoke publicly about Elena's competence and reliability, pointing out that her patient outcomes were consistently superior to department averages. They organized informal protests against Harrison's treatment of Elena, including petition drives and complaints to the hospital administration. Elena's defenders included nurses who had worked with her for years and could testify to her character and professional integrity. They described countless instances of Elena staying late to comfort dying patients, helping families navigate complex medical decisions, and providing emotional support that went far beyond her nursing duties. Her personal phone number was known to dozens of former patients who continued to seek her advice years after their hospital stays. The support from her colleagues created additional pressure on Harrison to justify his campaign against Elena with concrete evidence rather than suspicions and personality conflicts. Hospital administration demanded specific documentation of any policy violations or patient care concerns that would warrant disciplinary action. Human Resources required detailed incident reports for any formal complaints about employee performance or conduct. Harrison's frustration grew as Elena continued to perform her duties with flawless competence while maintaining the same professional demeanor that had characterized her 10 years at St. Catherine's. Her patient documentation was impeccable, her medication administration was precise, and her interaction with families was consistently praised by physicians and administrators who observed her work. During a staff meeting focused on quality improvement initiatives, Elena presented a comprehensive analysis of cardiac ICU workflows that impressed even senior physicians with its depth and sophistication. Her recommendations for improving patient safety and reducing medical errors demonstrated strategic thinking that seemed far beyond what any bedside nurse should reasonably possess. Nurse Rodriguez, Dr. Henley commented after Elena's presentation, "Your analysis is remarkably thorough. Have you considered pursuing advanced degrees in healthcare administration or quality management?" Elena politely declined, stating that she preferred direct patient care to administrative responsibilities. But Harrison noticed that her presentation had included references to military medical protocols and battlefield casualty management principles that had no place in civilian healthcare discussions. Her knowledge of resource allocation under crisis conditions seemed far too practical for academic study. The presentation marked a turning point in hospital perception of Elena's value as an employee. Senior physicians who had previously supported Harrison's concerns began questioning whether his harassment of such a competent nurse was serving the hospital's best interests. Elena's demonstrated expertise in quality improvement and patient safety made her an asset that the administration was reluctant to lose. Harrison's isolation increased as his campaign against Elena began to affect his own professional standing. Colleagues questioned his judgment in targeting a nurse whose performance was exemplary by any objective measure. His obsession with Elena's background was beginning to interfere with his medical responsibilities and damage his reputation among the hospital staff. The situation reached a crisis point when Harrison discovered that Elena had been conducting informal medical consultations for hospital employees and their families. Several nurses had sought her advice about complex medical issues, and she had provided guidance that proved remarkably accurate and helpful. Her recommendations had led to early diagnoses of serious conditions and prevented medical errors that could have resulted in patient harm. "She's practicing medicine without a license," Harrison argued during a heated discussion with hospital administration. "No nurse has the authority to provide medical diagnoses or treatment recommendations outside their scope of practice. This represents serious liability for the hospital and potential harm to patients." Dr. Henley reviewed the documented cases and found that Elena had consistently advised people to seek appropriate medical attention while providing information rather than diagnoses. Her recommendations had been presented as suggestions rather than medical orders, and she had carefully avoided any actions that would constitute practicing medicine without a license. Elena's informal consultations revealed another layer of her mysterious expertise. Her knowledge of rare medical conditions and complex pharmaceutical interactions exceeded what any ICU nurse should reasonably possess. She could interpret diagnostic imaging with radiologist-level accuracy and suggest treatment approaches that impressed physicians with their sophistication and clinical relevance. Harrison's accusations of unlicensed medical practice failed to gain traction with hospital administration, but they marked the beginning of a more aggressive phase in his campaign against Elena. He began documenting every interaction, searching for any deviation from standard nursing protocols that could justify formal disciplinary action. Elena adapted to the increased scrutiny by becoming even more methodical in her documentation and patient care procedures. She requested approval for routine decisions that she had previously handled independently, sought physician consultation for minor issues that other nurses would have managed autonomously, and maintained detailed records of every interaction with patients and their families. The additional documentation revealed the true scope of Elena's patient care excellence. Her notes were comprehensive and accurate, her assessment skills were remarkable, and her ability to anticipate patient needs bordered on prescient. Even Harrison had to acknowledge that Elena's nursing care was technically flawless, even if her background remained mysterious. The conflict between Elena and Harrison created ripple effects throughout the hospital that extended far beyond the cardiac ICU. Other departments began hearing stories about the brilliant nurse who was being persecuted by an arrogant surgeon. Elena's reputation for competence and compassion spread through the hospital grapevine, creating sympathy for her situation and criticism of Harrison's behavior. Elena maintained her professional demeanor throughout the escalating conflict, but observant colleagues noticed subtle changes in her behavior that suggested growing stress. She worked longer hours, took fewer breaks, and seemed hypervigilant about her surroundings in ways that hadn't been apparent during her first years at the hospital. Her apartment building's security guard mentioned that she had started varying her routine and requesting information about unfamiliar visitors. The investigation into Elena's background continued to yield frustrating results for Harrison and hospital administration. Every lead seemed to reach a dead end protected by federal privacy laws or classification restrictions. Elena's military service records, if they existed, were sealed beyond civilian access. Her educational transcripts from certain periods were protected by regulations that prevented disclosure without court orders. Elena's financial records showed a pattern of careful frugality that left few traces of personal interests or lifestyle choices.
Her bank accounts revealed automatic payments for basic living expenses, charitable donations to veterans organizations, and modest savings that suggested someone living well below their means. Her credit history was exemplary, but her spending patterns revealed nothing about hobbies, relationships, or personal interests that might provide insight into her background. The dead ends in Elena's background investigation only increased Harrison's determination to expose whatever secrets she was hiding. He began conducting surveillance of her activities outside the hospital, hoping to discover associations or behaviors that would provide leverage for forcing her resignation or termination. Elena seemed aware of Harrison's surveillance but showed no attempt to conceal her activities or alter her routine. She continued her methodical lifestyle of work, exercise, grocery shopping, and solitary evenings at home. Her behavior suggested someone accustomed to observation who understood that the best defense against scrutiny was to maintain an absolutely consistent and unremarkable facade. The stalemate between Elena and Harrison might have continued indefinitely, with each side probing for weaknesses while maintaining professional facades. Hospital administration was growing tired of the conflict and beginning to consider transferring one or both parties to different departments to resolve the situation. Elena's supporters among the nursing staff were organizing more formal protests against Harrison's treatment of their colleague. But external forces beyond their control were already in motion that would transform their personal conflict into something far more dangerous. Elena's carefully constructed civilian identity was about to be tested in ways that would reveal whether her decade of peaceful service had dulled the skills that had once made her invaluable in very different circumstances. The autumn evening brought unseasonably warm weather to the city as Elena completed her shift with the same methodical precision that had characterized her 10 years at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital. She had no way of knowing that across town men with automatic weapons were making final preparations for an assault that would strip away her carefully maintained anonymity and force her to confront the part of herself she had buried beneath a decade of bedside nursing. Harrison Mitchell was working late in his office, reviewing Elena's personnel file for the 100th time and searching for any detail that might provide the breakthrough he needed to expose her secrets. He had no idea that his campaign of harassment against Elena was about to become irrelevant in the face of a crisis that would reveal exactly why some nurses possessed skills that went far beyond bedside manner. The hospital's carefully maintained routine was about to be shattered by violence that would strip away all pretense and reveal the true nature of the woman who had walked among them for 10 years without anyone understanding what she really was. Elena Rodriguez, quiet night shift nurse, was less than 24 hours away from becoming something far more dangerous than Harrison Mitchell had ever imagined possible. The emergency alert system screamed through St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night that would forever change how the world saw Elena Rodriguez. The shrill electronic wail cut through the normal sounds of ventilators and monitoring equipment, sending chills down the spines of every staff member who understood what Code Silver meant. Armed intruders had breached the hospital's security perimeter. Elena was adjusting medications for Mrs. Patterson in room 314 when the lights flickered and the announcement crackled over the intercom system. Code Silver. Code Silver. All personnel implement lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. The voice belonged to Security Chief Marcus Thompson, but the strain in his tone suggested a situation far beyond the hospital's standard emergency protocols. Through the cardiac ICU windows, Elena could see muzzle flashes illuminating the parking garage across the courtyard. The staccato rhythm of automatic weapons fire echoed off the hospital's concrete facade, punctuated by screams and the crash of breaking glass. 6 armed men in tactical gear were moving through the main lobby with military precision, their movements coordinated like a unit that had trained extensively for this specific operation. Elena's decade of careful anonymity evaporated in an instant as muscle memory took control of her actions. She moved to the window with fluid efficiency, her eyes cataloging the attackers' weapons, their formation patterns, and their obvious familiarity with the hospital's layout. These weren't random criminals or desperate addicts seeking drugs. This was a coordinated assault by professionals who had studied their target extensively. "Everyone get down and stay away from the windows," Elena called out to the nursing staff, her voice carrying an authority that cut through their panic. "Move the mobile patients to interior rooms immediately. Secure all medication supplies and prepare for possible evacuation." The other nurses stared at her in confusion, but something in Elena's tone compelled immediate obedience. She had transformed from quiet colleague to commanding presence in the space between heartbeats, and her instructions carried the weight of someone accustomed to life or death decision-making under extreme pressure. Dr. Harrison Mitchell emerged from his office at the sound of gunfire, his face pale with shock and disbelief. "What's happening? Why are there armed men in the hospital?" His medical training had prepared him for many emergencies, but nothing in his privileged background had equipped him to handle armed violence in his workplace. Elena was already moving through the ICU with purposeful efficiency, checking on patients who couldn't be moved and ensuring that critical medical equipment remained operational. "Dr. Mitchell, we need to secure this unit immediately. Help me move Mr. Rodriguez to the supply closet. His ventilator is portable, and that room has no windows." Harrison stood frozen as Elena lifted the elderly patient with surprising strength, supporting his weight while maneuvering the ventilator equipment with practiced ease. Her movements demonstrated familiarity with emergency medical evacuation procedures that no ICU nurse should possess, but the crisis left no time for questions about her unusual expertise. The attackers' voices echoed through the hospital corridors as they moved systematically through each floor. Their communication was conducted in accented English that suggested Eastern European origins, and their tactical discipline indicated military or paramilitary training. Elena listened to their radio chatter with the focused attention of someone fluent in the language of violence. "They're looking for someone specific," Elena told Harrison as she secured the last mobile patient in the interior supply room. "This isn't a random attack or robbery, they have a target, and they know exactly where to find them." Harrison's confusion deepened as Elena's assessment proved accurate. The attackers bypassed valuable medical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies, focusing instead on accessing patient records and demanding information from hospital staff. Their questions centered on a particular patient who had been admitted to the cardiac ICU 3 days earlier under maximum security protocols. Viktor Petrov, a former Russian intelligence operative who had defected to the United States, was recovering from emergency cardiac surgery in the hospital's most secure wing. His presence at St. Catherine's was supposed to be classified information, known only to federal agents and select hospital administrators. The fact that armed terrorists had located him suggested a security breach that reached into the highest levels of the intelligence community. Elena's understanding of the situation crystallized as she listened to the attackers' tactical communications. This was an assassination mission designed to eliminate a high-value target who possessed information that could damage powerful interests. The hospital had become a battlefield, and innocent patients and staff were trapped in the crossfire of an international intelligence operation. "Dr. Mitchell," Elena said, her voice carrying deadly calm, "I need you to stay with the patients and keep them quiet. Don't let anyone leave this room until I give the all-clear signal." Harrison grabbed her arm as she moved toward the door. "Where are you going? We need to wait for the police to handle this situation. You're not qualified to deal with armed terrorists." Elena looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up to meet his eyes. The woman he had been harassing for months had disappeared, replaced by someone whose dark eyes held the cold calculation of a predator evaluating threats. Mitchell, I'm probably the only person in this hospital who is qualified to deal with this situation. Stay with the patients. She removed his hand from her arm with gentle but irresistible force and slipped out of the supply room before he could protest further. The corridor beyond was illuminated by emergency lighting that cast long shadows and created perfect concealment for someone who understood how to move without being detected. Elena made her way through the hospital with ghost-like silence, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floors. She avoided the main corridors where the attackers were conducting their search, instead using service passages and maintenance tunnels that most staff members didn't know existed. Her knowledge of the hospital's hidden infrastructure seemed far too detailed for someone whose official duties were limited to patient care. The first terrorist she encountered was posted as a lookout near the main elevator bank on the 3rd floor. He was young, probably early 20s, with the nervous alertness of someone on his first major operation. His weapon handling was competent but not exceptional, and his positioning revealed tactical training that was adequate but not professional military standard. Elena observed him from the shadows for 30 seconds, analyzing his movement patterns and assessing his level of experience. When she moved, it was with the fluid precision of someone who had eliminated human targets many times before. She approached from his blind spot, applied a blood choke that rendered him unconscious in less than 10 seconds, and secured his weapon before his body hit the floor. The assault rifle was a modified AK-74, with tactical accessories that confirmed these weren't common criminals. The weapon's serial numbers had been filed away, and its ammunition was military-grade hollow-point rounds designed for maximum tissue damage. Elena checked the magazine capacity and noted the weapon's maintenance condition with the automatic assessment of someone intimately familiar with small arms. Elena's movement through the hospital became a deadly game of cat and mouse as she systematically eliminated the terrorist lookouts while gathering intelligence about their mission parameters. Each engagement was conducted with professional efficiency that left no witnesses and minimal evidence. She moved like a shadow through corridors where she had walked peacefully for 10 years, now transformed into a hunter stalking prey through familiar territory. The second terrorist was older and more experienced, stationed near the cardiac surgery recovery ward where Viktor Petrov was being treated. His positioning was tactically sound, and his weapon handling demonstrated professional military training. Elena studied him for several minutes before deciding on her approach, recognizing that this engagement would require more sophisticated techniques. She created a distraction by triggering a fire alarm in an adjacent wing, drawing the terrorist's attention away from his assigned position. When he moved to investigate the potential threat, Elena struck with lethal precision. The encounter lasted less than 15 seconds and ended with Elena in possession of additional weapons and tactical equipment. Elena's collection of enemy weapons grew as she moved through the hospital, but more importantly, she gathered intelligence about the attackers' command structure and mission objectives. Their radio communications revealed a sophisticated operation with external support and real-time intelligence about hospital security measures. Someone had provided them with detailed architectural plans and staff schedules that suggested inside assistance. Dr. Harrison Mitchell remained in the supply closet with the patients, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. Elena Rodriguez, the quiet nurse he had been harassing for months, had transformed into something that defied every assumption he had made about her background and capabilities. Her tactical assessment of the situation and professional handling of the crisis suggested training that went far beyond civilian healthcare. The patients under Harrison's care sensed his shock and confusion, but their trust in Elena's competence was absolute. They had experienced her compassionate care for years and understood that whatever Elena was doing, she was acting to protect them. Their faith in her abilities was based on countless small demonstrations of her exceptional skills and unwavering dedication to patient welfare. Elena's infiltration of the terrorist operation revealed the true scope of the threat they represented. This wasn't simply an assassination mission targeting Viktor Petrov. The attackers planned to eliminate all witnesses to their presence in the hospital, including patients and staff who might provide testimony about their operation. The body count was intended to be comprehensive and absolute. The discovery of their genocidal intentions transformed Elena's response from defensive to aggressively offensive. She was no longer simply protecting patients in her immediate area. She was conducting a counter-terrorism operation designed to neutralize a threat that extended to every innocent person in the hospital. Her decade of peaceful service as a nurse had done nothing to diminish the lethal skills that had once made her invaluable to very different organizations. Elena's tactical assessment of the remaining terrorists revealed a command structure centered on a team leader who was coordinating the operation from the hospital's administrative offices. He was directing the search for Viktor Petrov while managing external communications with support elements outside the building. Eliminating him would decapitate the operation and create confusion that could be exploited to save civilian lives. The approach to the administrative wing required Elena to move through areas of the hospital where she would be most vulnerable to detection. The main corridors were illuminated by emergency lighting that offered little concealment, and the terrorist team leader had positioned his remaining operatives to cover all obvious approach routes. Elena would need to use skills that she hadn't employed in over a decade. Elena's infiltration route took her through the hospital's mechanical systems using air conditioning ducts and utility passages that required intimate knowledge of the building's infrastructure. Her movement through these confined spaces was conducted with the silent efficiency of someone trained in covert penetration techniques. She emerged in the administrative wing's computer server room directly adjacent to the offices where the terrorist leader was conducting his operation. The terrorist commander was a professional operator whose tactical discipline and situational awareness marked him as former special forces or intelligence service. His positioning in the administrative offices provided excellent visibility of the surrounding area while offering multiple escape routes if the situation deteriorated. His communications with external support elements revealed a sophisticated operation with backup plans and contingency protocols. Elena observed the terrorist leader for 10 minutes, analyzing his movement patterns and assessing his tactical capabilities. This would be her most dangerous engagement, requiring split-second timing and flawless execution. Any mistake would alert the remaining terrorists to her presence and potentially result in the massacre of innocent civilians throughout the hospital. When Elena moved against the terrorist commander, it was with the devastating efficiency of someone trained to eliminate high-value targets under extreme time pressure. The engagement combined close-quarters combat techniques with improvised weapons that turned common hospital equipment into lethal instruments. The terrorist leader's military training was no match for Elena's superior experience and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Elena's elimination of the terrorist command element created immediate confusion among the remaining operatives. Their radio communications became fragmented and contradictory as subordinate leaders attempted to assume control of an operation that was rapidly deteriorating. Elena exploited their disorganization by conducting a series of lightning attacks that systematically dismantled their remaining capability. The final phase of Elena's counter-terrorism operation involved protecting Viktor Petrov while eliminating the last terrorist operatives who were conducting a desperate search for their primary target. The cardiac surgery recovery ward had become a fortress under siege, with Elena as its sole defender against enemies who possessed superior numbers but inferior tactical skills. Elena's defense of the cardiac wing demonstrated the full scope of her professional capabilities. She used the hospital's medical equipment and architectural features to create defensive positions that maximized her advantages while minimizing the terrorists' numerical superiority.
Her knowledge of the building's layout allowed her to control their movement and force them into killing zones, where her superior marksmanship could be employed with devastating effect. Harrison Mitchell watched through a crack in the supply room door as Elena moved through the cardiac ICU with weapons she had taken from dead terrorists. Her transformation from compassionate nurse to lethal operative was complete, and her tactical competence was undeniable. Every assumption he had made about her background and capabilities had been shattered by the reality of her performance under extreme pressure. Elena's final engagement with the remaining terrorists occurred in the main corridor of the cardiac wing, where she used her intimate knowledge of patient room layouts to create an ambush that eliminated the last threats to civilian safety. The encounter was brief and decisive, demonstrating marksmanship skills that belonged to elite military or intelligence operatives rather than healthcare workers. The silence that followed the last gunshot was profound and unsettling. Elena stood in the corridor surrounded by the aftermath of violence, her scrubs torn and blood-stained but her composure absolute.
She methodically secured the weapons and equipment of the defeated terrorists while conducting a tactical assessment to ensure no additional threats remained in the hospital. Elena's return to the supply room where Dr. Mitchell waited with the patients marked the end of her counter-terrorism operation. She appeared in the doorway like a ghost materializing from shadow, her dark eyes scanning the room to confirm the safety of everyone under her protection. The transformation back to compassionate nurse was immediate and complete. "The threat has been neutralized," Elena announced, her voice carrying the same calm authority she had used for medical emergencies throughout her 10 years at the hospital. "Emergency services are responding, and the building is secure. We can begin moving patients back to their rooms." Dr. Harrison Mitchell stared at Elena as she began checking on patient welfare with the same methodical precision she brought to routine nursing care. The woman who had just eliminated 6 armed terrorists was conducting post-crisis medical assessments, as if violence was simply another aspect of patient care that required professional attention. Elena's debriefing with arriving federal agents was conducted with the same concise professionalism that characterized her medical documentation. She provided tactical intelligence about the terrorist operation, while avoiding any details that might reveal the extent of her own capabilities. Her report was comprehensive and accurate, but carefully edited to maintain the facade of a nurse who had simply done what was necessary to protect her patients. The investigation that followed would reveal the true scope of the terrorist threat and the international implications of their mission. Viktor Petrov's assassination had been ordered by elements within the Russian intelligence service who feared his defection would expose decades of covert operations. The attack on St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital was intended to eliminate him while creating plausible deniability through the apparent random violence. Elena's intervention had prevented not only Viktor's assassination but also the massacre of innocent civilians that was designed to conceal the true purpose of the attack. Her actions had saved dozens of lives while preserving critical intelligence that would prove invaluable to national security investigations. Yet her official role in the incident would remain carefully obscured behind classification barriers that protected sources and methods. Dr. Harrison Mitchell found himself facing a professional and personal crisis that challenged every assumption he had made about Elena Rodriguez. The quiet nurse he had been harassing for months had demonstrated capabilities that placed her among the most elite operatives in the intelligence community. His campaign to expose her secrets now seemed not only petty but potentially dangerous to national security interests. Elena's return to normal nursing duties in the aftermath of the terrorist attack was seamless and unremarkable. She provided medical care to patients who had been traumatized by the violence while processing insurance paperwork and medication orders with the same methodical efficiency she had always demonstrated. Her behavior suggested that eliminating armed terrorists was simply another emergency procedure that required professional competence. The hospital administration's response to the incident was carefully managed by federal agents who understood the sensitive nature of Elena's background and capabilities. Official reports credited quick thinking by hospital security and the rapid response of law enforcement agencies. Elena's role was described in terms that emphasized her medical training and dedication to patient welfare while obscuring the tactical skills that had actually neutralized the threat. Elena's colleagues in the cardiac ICU struggled to reconcile their memories of the terrorist attack with their understanding of the quiet nurse who worked among them. They had witnessed Elena's transformation into something lethal and professional, but her return to normal nursing duties made it easy to rationalize what they had seen as adrenaline-fueled heroism rather than professional military competence. Dr. Harrison Mitchell's investigation into Elena's background took on new urgency as he realized the implications of harboring someone with her capabilities within the hospital's civilian environment. His concerns shifted from personal harassment to legitimate questions about institutional security and the potential liability of employing someone whose true identity remained classified beyond his clearance level. Elena's patient care in the weeks following the terrorist attack demonstrated even greater competence and compassion than she had shown during her previous years at the hospital. She provided emotional support to trauma survivors while managing complex medical cases with flawless technical skill. Her dedication to healing seemed intensified by her recent experience with violence and death. The transformation in Elena's relationship with hospital staff was subtle but profound. Colleagues who had supported her during Harrison's harassment campaign now viewed her with a mixture of respect and uncertainty.
They understood that Elena Rodriguez, quiet night shift nurse, possessed capabilities that went far beyond anything they had imagined possible. Elena's apartment remained the same modest space it had always been, but federal agents had conducted discreet security assessments that resulted in enhanced protection measures. Her daily routine continued unchanged, but surveillance protocols had been implemented to ensure her safety while maintaining the facade of normal civilian life. The investigation into the terrorist attack revealed connections to international criminal organizations and state-sponsored intelligence operations that extended far beyond the immediate threat to Viktor Petrov. Elena's intervention had disrupted a network of covert activities that threatened American national security interests across multiple continents. Elena's medical expertise took on new significance as federal investigators realized that her nursing skills provided perfect cover for intelligence operations that required intimate access to sensitive targets. Her decade of service at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital had established credibility and trust that could be invaluable for future national security missions. Dr. Harrison Mitchell's position at the hospital became increasingly uncomfortable as he recognized the ethical implications of his previous treatment of Elena. His harassment campaign had targeted someone whose service to the country far exceeded his own contribution to national welfare. The reversal of their relative positions in terms of honor and sacrifice was both humbling and professionally devastating. Elena's quiet competence continued to define her interactions with patients and colleagues, but perceptive observers noticed changes in her security consciousness and situational awareness. She had returned to her nursing duties with the same dedication she had always shown, but her experience with recent violence had heightened her vigilance in ways that couldn't be completely concealed. The hospital's routine gradually returned to normal as the memory of the terrorist attack faded into administrative reports and insurance settlements. Elena resumed her position as the reliable night shift nurse who arrived precisely on time and completed her duties with exceptional competence. Yet everyone who had witnessed her transformation understood that Elena Rodriguez was far more than she appeared to be. Elena's future at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital remained uncertain as federal agents evaluated her cover status and operational security requirements. Her exposure during the terrorist attack had compromised some aspects of her carefully constructed civilian identity, requiring adjustments to ensure her continued effectiveness in whatever role she might be asked to fill. The question of Elena's true identity and ultimate loyalties would continue to challenge everyone who worked with her at the hospital. She had demonstrated that compassionate nursing and lethal competence could coexist in the same person, but the implications of that combination remained unsettling for colleagues who preferred their heroes to be less complicated and their nurses to be less dangerous. The morning sun filtered through the conference room windows of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital as Elena sat across from Dr. Patricia Henley and a man in an expensive suit who had introduced himself only as Agent Morrison. 3 days had passed since the terrorist attack, and the hospital was slowly returning to its normal rhythm, though nothing would ever truly be the same. Agent Morrison placed a classified folder on the polished table between them, his expression professionally neutral. "Miss Rodriguez, or should I say Major Elena Vasquez, your cover has been substantially compromised. We need to discuss your future operational status." Elena's true identity hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. Major Elena Vasquez, former Army Special Operations decorated veteran of conflicts that officially never happened, specialist in counterterrorism and deep cover intelligence work. For 10 years she had been Elena Rodriguez, cardiac ICU nurse living a carefully constructed life of healing instead of killing. Dr. Henley struggled to reconcile the quiet nurse she had known with the woman described in the classified documents spread before her. "Elena, I need to understand why you're here. Why nursing? Why our hospital?" Elena's response carried the weight of a decade's worth of buried truth. "After my last assignment I was offered a choice. Retirement with full benefits and a new identity, or continued active duty with increasing psychological evaluation requirements. I chose healing over harm. Nursing allowed me to save lives instead of taking them." The transition from Major Vasquez to Elena Rodriguez had been orchestrated by a joint CIA-Army program designed to provide deep cover identities for operatives whose skills might be needed for domestic security operations. Elena's medical training during her military service had been extensive, making her nursing credentials legitimate rather than fabricated. Agent Morrison reviewed Elena's service record with clinical detachment. 18 confirmed neutralizations across 7 countries.
Specialist in urban infiltration and high-value target elimination. Your psychological evaluations indicated increasing difficulty with violent assignments. The nursing placement was intended as therapeutic cover while maintaining your availability for critical national security situations. Elena had excelled at nursing for the same reasons she had excelled at special operations. Both required precise attention to detail, the ability to function under extreme pressure, and absolute dedication to mission completion. The difference was that nursing missions involved preserving life rather than ending it, a distinction that had provided psychological healing she hadn't expected to find. Dr. Henley leaned forward, her voice filled with genuine concern. Elena, how do we move forward from here? Your colleagues need to understand what happened, but obviously there are security considerations that complicate any explanation. The hospital's official story credited Elena with exceptional bravery during a terrorist attack, emphasizing her medical training and quick thinking while omitting any details about her tactical capabilities. The narrative satisfied media inquiries and insurance investigations without revealing classified information that could compromise national security. Elena's colleagues had accepted the official explanation with varying degrees of skepticism, but their respect for her had only increased. They understood that Elena had risked her life to protect patients and staff, and her motivations seemed consistent with the dedication she had always shown to her nursing duties. Harrison Mitchell entered the conference room with obvious reluctance, his usual arrogance replaced by something that resembled shame. The past 3 days had forced him to confront the reality of his treatment of Elena and the implications of his ignorance about her true background and sacrifices. Elena, Harrison said, his voice lacking its customary authority, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond professional courtesy. I targeted you because I didn't understand who you were or what you had given up to serve this hospital and our patients. Elena studied Harrison with the same analytical gaze she had once reserved for enemy combatants, but her expression softened as she recognized genuine remorse rather than political maneuvering. Dr. Mitchell, you reacted to what you perceived as anomalies in my background. Your concerns about hospital security weren't entirely unreasonable, even if your methods were inappropriate. Agent Morrison interrupted their reconciliation with bureaucratic efficiency. Major Vasquez, your cover identity is no longer viable for continued deep placement operations. However, your demonstrated commitment to civilian life and your exceptional performance during the recent crisis have created new possibilities for your career trajectory. Elena's decade of nursing had given her a sense of purpose and peace that her military service had never provided. The idea of returning to a world of violence and death held no appeal, but she understood that her unique combination of medical expertise and tactical capabilities made her valuable for situations that required both skill sets. I want to continue nursing, Elena said with quiet determination. Whatever arrangements need to be made for security clearances or background verification, I'm committed to patient care as my primary focus. If my other skills are needed for national security, I'm available for consultation, but I won't return to full-time operational status. Dr. Henley smiled with obvious relief. Elena, you're one of the finest nurses this hospital has ever had. If federal authorities can provide appropriate documentation to satisfy our administrative requirements, I would be honored to have you continue serving our patients. Agent Morrison nodded slowly, recognizing that Elena's value to national security might actually be enhanced by her continued civilian role. Her established credibility in the medical community provided perfect cover for intelligence operations that required healthcare access, while her nursing expertise made her uniquely qualified for missions involving medical facilities or personnel. The arrangement that emerged from their negotiations allowed Elena to continue her nursing career while maintaining security clearance for consultation on specialized operations. Her official background would be sanitized to remove classified details while preserving her legitimate medical credentials and employment history. Elena's return to normal nursing duties was marked by subtle changes that reflected her changed status within the hospital community. Colleagues who had witnessed her actions during the terrorist attack treated her with a mixture of respect and curiosity, understanding that there were aspects of her background they would never fully comprehend. Dr. Harrison Mitchell's transformation was perhaps even more dramatic than Elena's revelation. His harassment campaign had been based on arrogance and insecurity, emotions that seemed trivial in light of Elena's actual service and sacrifice. He began making amends through professional respect and administrative support that gradually rebuilt their working relationship. Elena's patient care took on new dimensions as she applied lessons learned from her military service to civilian medical challenges. Her understanding of trauma psychology helped her provide exceptional support to patients recovering from violent incidents, while her tactical training enhanced her ability to manage medical emergencies that required split-second decision-making. The hospital security protocols were quietly enhanced based on Elena's recommendations about vulnerability assessments and emergency response procedures. Her insights into potential threats and countermeasures were invaluable for protecting patients and staff without creating an atmosphere of paranoia or militarization. Elena's apartment remained modestly furnished, but federal agents had implemented discreet security measures that protected her while maintaining the appearance of normal civilian life. Her daily routine continued unchanged, though she now carried emergency communication devices that would allow rapid response to national security situations requiring her expertise.
The nursing staff gradually adjusted to the new reality of working alongside someone whose background included capabilities they couldn't fully understand. Elena's commitment to patient care and colleague support remained unchanged, but her ability to handle crisis situations with exceptional competence was now understood as professional training rather than natural aptitude. Elena's relationship with Viktor Petrov, the Russian defector whose protection had triggered the terrorist attack, evolved into an unlikely friendship based on shared understanding of the costs of serving principles larger than personal comfort. His recovery provided Elena with insights into the ongoing value of her sacrifice and the lives she had saved through her intervention. Henley established new policies for handling patients who required enhanced security measures, drawing on Elena's expertise to ensure that medical care wouldn't be compromised by protection protocols. Elena's unique perspective bridged the gap between healthcare requirements and security necessities. Elena's future stretched before her with possibilities she hadn't imagined during her decade of quiet anonymity. Her nursing career provided personal fulfillment and professional purpose, while her security clearance opened doors to specialized assignments that could make meaningful contributions to national welfare. The transformation of Elena's professional relationships extended beyond the hospital to include connections with federal agencies that valued her unique combination of medical expertise and operational experience. She became a consultant for situations requiring both skill sets, providing analysis and support without returning to full-time intelligence work. Elena's legacy at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital would be measured not only by her exceptional nursing care but also by her demonstration that healing and protection could be provided by the same hands. Her story became an inspiration to colleagues who understood that heroism often wore scrubs and worked night shifts rather than uniforms and medals. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cardiac ICU as Elena completed her shift with the same methodical precision that had characterized her 10 years of service. Her transformation from Major Vasquez to Elena Rodriguez and back to Elena Vasquez, RN, had come full circle, but she was no longer the same person who had entered the hospital seeking refuge from a violent past. Elena's future missions would combine her passion for healing with her commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Whether responding to medical emergencies or national security threats, she would bring the same dedication to preserving life that had made her both an exceptional soldier and an extraordinary nurse. The hospital's routine continued around Elena as she prepared to leave for the day, but everyone who worked with her understood that they were in the presence of someone special. Elena Rodriguez, quiet night shift nurse, guardian of the sick and wounded, protector of the innocent, had revealed herself to be exactly what she had always been, a hero who chose healing over harm, service over self, and hope over despair. As Elena walked toward the hospital's exit, her silhouette disappearing into the morning light, she carried with her the knowledge that some secrets were worth keeping, and some sacrifices were worth making. Her decade of anonymous service had prepared her for a future where her greatest victories would still be measured in lives saved rather than enemies defeated. The story of Elena Rodriguez would become legend among those who knew the truth, but her greatest achievement was that she had found peace with herself and purpose in service to others. Whether fighting terrorists or fighting disease, she remained committed to the principle that every life was worth protecting and every person deserved someone willing to stand between them and the darkness. Elena's journey from warrior to healer and back to warrior healer was complete, but her mission continued. Somewhere in the city, people needed protection, patients needed care, and families needed hope. Elena Rodriguez would be there for all of them, carrying her secrets and her skills in service of a world that was better because she had chosen compassion over violence and healing over harm. 6 months after the terrorist attack, Elena Vasquez stood at the bedside of 12-year-old Marcus Chen, gently adjusting his IV line while his mother watched with tear-filled eyes. The boy had been caught in a drive-by shooting 3 blocks from the hospital, and his injuries required the kind of trauma care that Elena's unique background made her exceptionally qualified to provide. "Will he be okay?" Mrs. Chen whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of a mother's fear. Elena checked Marcus's vital signs with the practiced efficiency that had become her trademark, but her voice carried the warmth and compassion that made her patients trust her completely. "He's going to make a full recovery. Children are remarkably resilient, and Marcus is a fighter. The surgery went perfectly, and his body is already beginning to heal." Dr. Harrison Mitchell observed Elena's interaction with the Chen family from the doorway, marveling at how seamlessly she had integrated her military medical training with the emotional intelligence that made her such an exceptional nurse. Their working relationship had evolved into genuine mutual respect built on shared commitment to patient welfare rather than the antagonism that had once defined their interactions. Elena's reputation throughout St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital had grown beyond her nursing duties to encompass her role as an informal consultant on security matters and crisis management. Her recommendations had led to improved emergency protocols that had already proven invaluable during subsequent incidents that never escalated to the level of violence they had faced 6 months earlier. The cardiac ICU, where Elena had worked for over a decade, had become something of a pilgrimage site for nursing students and medical professionals who wanted to observe her techniques for managing complex cases under pressure. Her ability to remain calm during medical emergencies while providing exceptional patient care had become legendary among healthcare workers throughout the region. Elena's mentorship of younger nurses had taken on new dimensions as she shared insights gained from her military experience without revealing classified details about her background. Her teaching focused on situational awareness, crisis decision-making, and the importance of maintaining composure during life-and-death situations that could overwhelm less experienced healthcare providers. Dr. Patricia Henley had leveraged Elena's expertise to establish St. Catherine's as a regional center of excellence for trauma care and emergency medicine. Elena's input on equipment purchases, staff training protocols, and facility design had transformed the hospital's capability to handle complex cases that other institutions might not be equipped to manage effectively. The federal consulting work that Elena performed on weekends and during her days off had proven invaluable for national security operations that required medical expertise combined with tactical knowledge. Her assignments ranged from threat assessments of healthcare facilities to providing medical support for sensitive operations that couldn't risk exposure through normal military channels. Elena's apartment had been transformed from a Spartan refuge into a comfortable home that reflected her integration of her past military service with her current civilian life. Photographs from her nursing career shared wall space with commendations from her Army service, creating a visual narrative of someone who had found peace with both aspects of her identity. The morning routine that had characterized Elena's decade of anonymity had evolved to accommodate her expanded responsibilities while maintaining the discipline and precision that had always defined her approach to both military and medical duties. Her days off were now filled with federal assignments that utilized her unique skill set while allowing her to continue serving national security interests. Elena's relationship with Viktor Petrov, the Russian defector whose protection had triggered the terrorist attack, had developed into a friendship based on shared understanding of the sacrifices required by service to principles larger than personal comfort. His insights into international intelligence operations had proven valuable for Elena's consulting work with federal agencies. The nursing staff at St. Catherine's had gradually adjusted to working alongside someone whose background included capabilities they couldn't fully comprehend, but whose commitment to patient care and colleague support remained unwavering. Elena's willingness to share her expertise while maintaining appropriate boundaries had earned her universal respect throughout the hospital. Elena's patient advocacy had expanded beyond individual cases to include systemic improvements in healthcare delivery for underserved populations, particularly veterans and trauma survivors who benefited from her understanding of both medical needs and psychological challenges associated with violence and recovery. Dr.
Harrison Mitchell's transformation from antagonist to ally had been complete, and he now served as Elena's primary supporter within the hospital administration. His recognition of his previous mistakes had led to genuine efforts to ensure that Elena's contributions were properly recognized and supported through appropriate administrative channels. The security enhancements that Elena had recommended for St. Catherine's had been implemented quietly and effectively, creating layered protection for patients and staff without creating an atmosphere of paranoia or militarization. Her approach emphasized prevention and early detection rather than reactive measures that might compromise the hospital's healing environment. Elena's teaching responsibilities had expanded to include presentations at medical conferences and nursing schools throughout the region, where her insights into crisis management and trauma care were eagerly sought by healthcare professionals who wanted to improve their own emergency response capabilities. The legend of Elena Rodriguez, quiet night shift nurse who had single-handedly defeated a terrorist cell, had spread throughout the healthcare community and beyond. Her story inspired countless healthcare workers who understood that their commitment to healing sometimes required courage that went far beyond normal professional expectations. Elena's future assignments with federal agencies were carefully selected to ensure compatibility with her nursing career and personal values. She had made it clear that her primary loyalty was to healing rather than harm, and her handlers respected her boundaries while recognizing the unique value of her perspective and capabilities. The morning shift change at St. Catherine's had become a daily reminder of Elena's impact on the hospital's culture and capabilities. Her influence extended far beyond her direct patient care to encompass improvements in emergency protocols, staff training, and security measures that protected everyone who worked in or visited the facility. Elena's personal relationships with her nursing colleagues had deepened as they came to understand that her mysterious competence was the result of service and sacrifice rather than natural talent or academic achievement. Her willingness to share her knowledge while protecting classified information had earned their trust and admiration. The Chen family's gratitude for Elena's care of their son reflected the thousands of patients and families who had benefited from her unique combination of medical expertise and compassionate dedication. Elena's ability to provide hope and healing in the darkest moments of human experience had become her greatest source of personal satisfaction and professional pride. Elena's consultation work with federal agencies had revealed ongoing threats to healthcare facilities and medical personnel that required the kind of specialized knowledge she possessed. Her recommendations for protecting hospitals and clinics from terrorist attacks and other security threats had been implemented nationwide, potentially saving countless lives. Dr. Henley's recognition of Elena's contributions had led to formal acknowledgement of her expertise through promotions and special assignments that utilized her unique background while respecting her commitment to nursing as her primary profession. Elena's title had evolved to Senior Clinical Specialist and Security Consultant, reflecting her dual role within the hospital. The terrorist attack that had revealed Elena's true capabilities had also exposed vulnerabilities in hospital security that extended far beyond St. Catherine's Memorial. Elena's analysis of these weaknesses had contributed to national healthcare security initiatives that improved protection for medical facilities throughout the country. Elena's legacy at St. Catherine's would be measured not only by the lives she had saved during the terrorist attack but also by the systematic improvements in patient care and safety that had resulted from her ongoing presence and expertise. Her influence had transformed the hospital into a model for integrating security considerations with medical excellence. The morning sun filtered through Elena's apartment windows as she prepared for another shift at the hospital, her routine now incorporating both nursing duties and federal consulting responsibilities that had become seamlessly integrated into her daily life. Her transformation from Major Vasquez to Elena Rodriguez and finally to Elena Vasquez, RN and security consultant, represented a journey toward wholeness that had taken over a decade to complete. Elena's commitment to her patients remained absolute, but her understanding of her role had expanded to encompass protection and healing on multiple levels. Whether treating gunshot victims in the ICU or analyzing terrorist threats for federal agencies, she brought the same dedication to preserving life and preventing harm that had defined both her military service and her nursing career. The quiet heroism that had characterized Elena's decade of anonymous service had evolved into acknowledged expertise that served both her hospital and her country. Her willingness to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them remained unchanged, but her methods had evolved to emphasize prevention and healing rather than purely reactive violence. Elena's influence on the next generation of healthcare workers extended through her formal teaching responsibilities and informal mentorship of nurses and physicians who sought to understand how to maintain compassion and competence under extreme pressure. Her example demonstrated that healing and protection could be provided by the same hands and the same heart. The federal agencies that utilized Elena's expertise had come to understand that her greatest value lay not in her capacity for violence but in her ability to think strategically about threats while maintaining unwavering commitment to preserving innocent life. Her recommendations consistently emphasized solutions that minimized harm to civilians while effectively neutralizing security threats. Elena's apartment had become a sanctuary that reflected her integration of past service with present purpose, but it also served as a secure location for federal briefings and planning sessions that required her specialized knowledge. Her home had evolved to accommodate both her personal need for peace and her professional obligations to national security. The morning routine that carried Elena from her apartment to the hospital remained unchanged in its basic structure, but it now incorporated security awareness and threat assessment protocols that had become second nature after years of dual civilian and federal service. Her vigilance protected not only herself but also the patients and colleagues who depended on her expertise. Elena's relationship with her patients had deepened as word spread throughout the community that St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital employed a nurse whose dedication and competence exceeded anything most people had ever experienced. Families specifically requested Elena's care for their most challenging cases, trusting that her unique background would provide advantages that other healthcare providers couldn't offer. Dr. Harrison Mitchell's advocacy for Elena within the hospital administration had become one of his defining professional characteristics, as he worked to ensure that her contributions were properly recognized and supported. His transformation from antagonist to ally served as an example of how personal growth and professional humility could overcome initial prejudices and misunderstandings. The security protocols that Elena had developed for St. Catherine's had been adopted by healthcare facilities throughout the region and beyond, creating a network of protected medical environments that could continue providing essential services even during security crises. Her influence had extended far beyond her immediate workplace to benefit countless patients and healthcare workers. Elena's consultation with federal agencies had revealed the extent to which healthcare facilities served as potential targets for terrorists and other threats to national security. Her expertise in both medical operations and tactical response had proven invaluable for developing countermeasures that protected these vital institutions without compromising their primary mission of healing. The legacy that Elena was building at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital extended beyond her individual service to encompass systemic improvements that would continue benefiting patients and staff long after her eventual retirement. Her influence had transformed not only emergency protocols and security measures but also the culture of excellence and dedication that defined the institution. Elena's future remained focused on the intersection of healing and protection, where her unique combination of medical expertise and tactical knowledge could serve the greatest good. Whether responding to medical emergencies or national security threats, she would continue bringing the same unwavering commitment to preserving life and preventing harm that had defined her journey from warrior to healer. The story of Elena Vasquez represented more than individual heroism. It demonstrated the possibility of transforming skills developed for warfare into capabilities that serve peace and healing. Her example inspired others to consider how their own talents and experiences could be redirected toward purposes that built rather than destroyed, healed rather than harmed. Elena's morning walk through the hospital corridors had become a daily reminder to patients and staff that protection and healing could coexist in the same person and the same institution. Her presence provided reassurance that someone with exceptional capabilities was dedicated to their welfare and safety, creating an environment where healing could occur without fear. The quiet confidence that had always characterized Elena's nursing practice had evolved to encompass her expanded role as guardian and protector of not only individual patients but also the institution that served them. Her vigilance ensured that St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital remained a sanctuary for healing rather than a target for those who would disrupt the sacred work of medicine. Elena's commitment to her dual roles as nurse and security consultant represented a unique synthesis of compassion and competence that served as a model for others who possessed skills that could be applied to multiple purposes. Her example demonstrated that true service required using one's capabilities for the greatest good rather than the greatest glory. The sun set over St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital as Elena completed another shift that had seamlessly integrated patient care with security awareness, medical expertise with tactical knowledge, and individual healing with collective protection. Her transformation from anonymous nurse to acknowledged expert had not diminished her commitment to the fundamental mission of preserving life and preventing suffering. Elena's legacy would continue growing through the lives she saved, the threats she prevented, the colleagues she mentored, and the systems she improved. Her story demonstrated that heroism often wore scrubs and worked night shifts, that the greatest warriors were sometimes those who chose healing over harm, and that true service meant using one's gifts to protect those who could not protect themselves. As Elena prepared to leave the hospital for another day, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that her unique journey from military service to nursing had prepared her for a life of meaningful contribution to both her patients and her country. Her commitment to healing and protection would continue guiding her choices and defining her service to others. The quiet heroism of Elena Vasquez represented the best of both military service and medical care, demonstrating that the skills developed for warfare could be transformed into capabilities that serve peace and healing. Her example inspired others to consider how their own experiences and talents could be directed toward purposes that built rather than destroyed, healed rather than harmed. Elena's influence extended far beyond the walls of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital to encompass improvements in healthcare security, emergency response protocols, and crisis management procedures that had been adopted throughout the region and beyond. Her legacy would continue protecting patients and healthcare workers long after her individual service had ended. The morning that awaited Elena would bring new challenges and opportunities to serve both her patients and her country, continuing the dual mission that had given her life meaning and purpose beyond anything she had imagined during her decade of anonymous nursing. Her commitment to healing and protection would guide her choices and define her contribution to a world that was better because she had chosen compassion over violence and service over self. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.